Hello and welcome to another lecture. In this lecture, I will discuss the social contract. Now, this lecture is not going to be very deep. It's going to be superficial in a sense that I'm going to discuss just the general ideas behind the social contract. Let me first start with a couple of remarks. One of the hardest problems for ethics is how to begin. It's very paradoxical because how do you begin doing ethics? It requires an ethical statement or some ethical beginning. One common strategy is to use basic moral assumptions. And that pretty much works this way. Let's inspect our feelings and our understanding of the world and see what kind of ideas and concepts and principles we share, we agree upon. For example, we can all agree that beneficence is good, non-maleficence, compassion. We can say that we should start from the principle that forbids slavery. We have to be compassionate. The problem is, with this strategy, how can we trust our assumptions? They're just assumptions. Now, some ethicists bite the bullet and they say, well, these assumptions are the basic assumptions of ethics, of reality, of reasoning, and we should trust them. And after all, there are a lot of basic assumptions that we make. Think about science. We make a lot of basic assumptions. For example, we make the basic assumption that there exists a physical world. We can't prove it, that there's a physical world outside our minds, but we accept it. It seems to us reasonable to accept it. So why don't we do the same with regard to morality? Many ethicists, however, are not satisfied with the basic assumptions approach. We can justify our basic moral views by implementing a procedure instead. Okay? So in other words, proceduralism is a different strategy. It's a strategy that says, although we feel that, for example, slavery is wrong and compassion is right, let's not assume that these principles are correct. Instead, let's follow a procedure that will show us the answer. It is similar to, let's say, for example, asking a computer, input some data in a computer, in a calculator, cold, unbiased calculator, to get the result. That's the idea of proceduralism. And the idea of contractarian theory, the social contract, contractualism, they follow this line of thought. They say what we offer is a procedure rather than beginning from assumptions. Now, the social contract is very old. It's not new. It goes back at least to Socrates. So this is a list of the most famous, the most eminent social contract proponents or philosophers, Contractarians, some people call them. Socrates, Hobbes, Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and more contemporary John Rawls. As I said, Contractarianism goes back to Plato. Now, I don't exclude it that there might be other examples of contractarian theory or principles, but the most famous ones, most famous examples are found in two very important works by Plato, the Crito and the Republic. In the Crito, or Crito, whichever way you want to pronounce it, which was, it is believed that it was written or published in 399 BCE, we learn that Socrates is in his prison cell awaiting for execution, because we previously learned from the Apology that he's accused of corrupting young Athenians. So he's put in jail and it's given the capital punishment. Very early in the morning, a friend of Socrates's shows up, bribes the guards, and begs Socrates to escape. Please, Socrates, you're a great man. The government was wrong. You're right. You have to escape. We're going to help you. Myself and a group of friends, we're going to help you escape. Socrates refuses. He says no. Here's the where Socrates gives the first form of what is going to be in the future known as the social contract. It's an interesting argument. Socrates says, I will not escape, even though I know that the Athenian government is wrong, they did something wrong to me, and I'm right, but I won't escape because I grew up in Athens. I lived my whole life in Athens. I believe that Socrates at this point is 70 years old. And my children grew up here too. They benefited from society as well as I did. I have. So this implies the fact that it is as if I signed a contract with the Athenian government. Not an explicit one, but an implicit contract where I said, I agree with your laws and principles. And then Socrates says, if you disagree with the principles and the laws of a particular state, you are free to leave. But I never left. So Socrates says, can you imagine in front of a judge, the judge is going to say to me, why did you try to escape? Didn't you know that these were the rules? 70 years old and you this is the first time that you hear that we have laws? Now, in another, interestingly, in another dialogue, possibly the most famous one, the Republic, Socrates presents a different view. Now, here we learn about a man named Glaucon, who, by the way, is is Plato's brother. Glaucon, among other people, other interlocutors, are having a discussion with Socrates about the nature of justice. and the origin of justice. And here in the Republic, it is Glaucon, not Socrates, who is offering a social contract. Glaucon says, I'll tell you why human beings come together. They come together because they fear that in a let's say in a state of nature, before laws, before regulations, before moral principles, they're always in fear because in the wild, there are no laws. Okay? I can take your properties, I can kill you, no one is going to put you in jail. So people fear that. They don't want to live that way. They don't want to live in fear. They want to sleep well and relax at night. So they come together and they decide to obey certain laws, to, in a sense, come to an agreement, a pact or a contract, where they say, I don't hurt you, you don't hurt me. Socrates, it's interesting because in the Republic says, no, that's not why people come together. The reason is because human beings are not self-sufficient. That's why they come together. Because everyone is born with a certain natural aptitude. For example, you are born with an aptitude to mathematics, and I was born with shoemaking skills, and that's when we come together and we form a society. But justice is not, as you describe, something that people practice because they fear punishment and they don't want to live in fear. Justice is something more than that. It's almost a magical thing. Justice is the proper relation among the parts of the soul. Socrates says the soul has three parts. The part that regulates the appetites, the appetitive part. Then there is also a rational part. And furthermore, there's a third element of the soul, the one that is very bold and courageous. When these three parts learn to coexist in harmony, and each part does its proper function according to its nature, that's justice. So as you can see, Socrates wants to prove that justice is the greatest good of humanity because it's good in itself and it's good for the consequences. Whereas Glaucon presents justice as just a pact that people follow but reluctantly. Okay, so this is the origin of Contractarian philosophy. Now, what I wanted to point out is that there are two different strains or two different aspects of Contractarian philosophy. One is known as Contractarianism, and the other Contractualism. Okay, Contractarianism, as I explained, is a political theory. Political theory that says that the legitimacy of government derives from the consent of rational individuals, like human beings, like people. So people come together and they freely decide that the best and the most rational course of action to live in a society is to give up their freedom. Okay? They give up their freedom in return for protection from a political body, whether that body is a king or a ruler or a group of politicians or whatnot. But this political body makes sure that there's equity and justice for all. On the other hand, contractualism is an ethical position. So essentially it is an ethical theory that derives from contractarian philosophy. And contractualism argues that morality, what do we mean by morality? We mean right, wrong, good, evil. All these concepts of morality and conduct and behavior derive from a social agreement. Typically in contractarian philosophy, there are at least two elements. And these are, one, a characterization of the initial situation. Typically, this is known as the state of nature or the original position. And the second element is a characterization of the parties to the contract. Okay? And the criteria and motivations for establishing a social contract. So these involve the idea of the state of nature and the human nature. Human nature is, well, it's interesting. Who knows about human nature? People have believed that human nature is fundamentally selfish. Now, if you read Thomas Hobbes, for example, the theories Hobbes says that human beings are just selfish. They are brutal, selfish. They cannot possibly live in harmony unless there's an authoritarian ruler that regulates their lives. It's impossible. By nature, they are selfish and belligerent. Or if you read Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for example, Jean-Jacques Rousseau argues that human beings are, by nature, nice. They're not violent. They're not selfish. Maybe you have heard of the concept of the noble savage. They're like noble savage. They don't do harm. They don't want to do harm. They're not selfish. However, the problem is that some human beings by nature are stronger or more intelligent than others. So inequality, in either case, inequality is going to surface and prevent harmonious, cohesive way of living. And what else do we know about human nature? We know that each individual desires to be number one. But there's scarcity, very often. Scarcity of resources and many other factors that make it impossible for everybody to be number one. Furthermore, we know that human beings are rational. We have this capacity of reason. Now, that doesn't mean that we always exercise such a capacity, or we're capable of exercising such a capacity. But we have the capacity of rationality. Now again, depending on the social political theorist, the state of when I talk about human nature, some theorists say that without a governing body, a political organization of any kind, human beings would be constantly at war. War for competition. And there would be diffidence and desire for glory at the same time. So it would be really brutal. The lives of human beings in such a state would be miserable, short and miserable, and very dangerous and painful. At the same time, as I said, it is in our nature that we fear death, we desire peace, and we desire to live comfortable lives. We don't want to be at war all the time. This brings us to the state of nature. Now, many social contract theorists imagine this hypothetical state of nature. It's not so hypothetical when you think about it. Think about a time prior to civilization, computers, literacy, any sort of organizations, not even tribal. So what do you think life would be like? It would not be very comfortable, obviously. So, no authorities, no one to tell you that you've done right or wrong. No morality, basically. And I don't mean that morality doesn't exist at all, but our understanding of morality doesn't exist in this hypothetical, or less than hypothetical, as I described, state of nature. So the contract, the social contract, is what brings human beings out of the state of nature. So in a way, you see, the state of nature, the social contract says human beings give up their freedom. That's the contract. You're not going to be able, you enter a contract, and by contract, by the stipulation, you're not going to be able to do certain things that you normally would do. Okay? You're not going to be able to throw paper on the ground and discard your garbage in the woods. So it restricts your freedom. But the interesting aspect of the social contract is that by restricting our freedoms, we actually gain freedom. Because guess what? Social contract theorists say, if you are not allowed to do freely do certain things, such as litter the parks and do just about anything you want, just kill strangers. By doing that, giving up these freedoms implies that the government now protects you. And implies that other people who are part of the contract, other people have to do the same. Okay? Which means that I am guaranteed that if I will not litter the park, other people will not do that either. If I pay taxes, I know, reluctantly, I hate to pay taxes. Okay? I hate to hold the door. I hate to say thank you and please. But if I do that, I know that there's a state that takes my freedoms away from me, but at the same time, it gives me freedom. It gives me more freedom. It gives me protection and a peace of mind. Because I can go to sleep at night. I don't need to fear that at any moment, someone is going to break into my apartment, kill me, and take things away. I mean, these things happen all the time, of course, but not without impunity. Now, of course, the big question when discussing the social contract is, why is it reasonable to follow the social contract? Why is it reasonable to abide by the contract and follow the moral rules? Who cares? I can be powerful enough, skilled enough, and just try to manipulate the system. Well, contractarians would say, certainly you may do that, you can do that, but if you are a rational individual, it is always to your advantage and to the advantage of all to obey orders, to follow the moral rules, to abide by the contract, to respect the contract. Now, for one thing, we want to be able to, as I just discussed, to count on other people to do the same. But also, it is this type of dilemma that shows why people typically are not rational, and they would be better off by being rational. This is a typical example of known as the prisoner's dilemma. In the prisoner's dilemma, there are two criminals. Let's call them Agent A and Agent B. Now, what happens when the police interrogates each one individually? They say to Agent B, you confess, you get a certain number of years, okay? Or you're off the hook, but the other guy is going to pay the consequences and go to jail. But if you do not cooperate and the other guy talks, if you want to stay silent, but the other guy or guys talk, or girls, there women commit crimes too, then if they talk, you're in big trouble. You're facing 10 years in jail. Okay? If you both talk, you're still facing some jail. Instead of 10 years, say 5 years. Now, what is the point of the prisoner's dilemma? The point is to show that, assuming that your goal is to spend as little time in prison as possible, there's an obvious way to behave. And the obvious way, which is the opposite way of the way in which criminals behave, because there's always one who spills the beans. Always one who rats out the other. Cooperation is the best course of action. As you can see, if both Agent A and B talk, they only face 1 year each, and then they're off the hook. So, assuming that your goal is to spend little time as possible in prison, the best course of action is to remain silent. But now, the point, okay, the bottom line here is that cooperation always pays off. So cooperating, so in terms of the social contract, to honor your contract and cooperate is always not only in the best interest of your adversary, but also in your best interest. Okay? Well, there's a lot to be said here. But again, as I pointed out, this is this is not a thorough, comprehensive discussion of the social contract. Here is a very interesting question. Does morality have an objective basis? Now, this question refers to what is known as meta-ethics. Go back to my ethics lecture for more information. But very simply, meta-ethics is the branch of ethics that studies the nature and origin of morality. I'm not talking about social conventions. I'm not talking about in our society, in the United States of America, we think that cannibalism is wrong. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about beyond that. Okay, so meta-ethicists ask whether there's something that goes above and beyond the simple social organizations and social morality. Some people believe that morality is an objective fact of the universe. In other words, there is right and wrong embedded in the universe. Okay? Interestingly, social contract theorists, by and large, think that there's no such thing as objective morality, because objective morality only means that morality, right and wrong, are rules dictated, created, invented, and implemented by human beings, by the contract. There are many problems with the social contract approach. Okay, I'm not going to talk about them all, and I'm not even going to try to respond to some of these objections are very strong. Some are not very strong, but obviously all these objections over the centuries have been addressed and readdressed many, many times. Books, papers, articles have been written for and against. So it's a very complicated business. I just want to talk about a couple. Number one, the social contract is based on a historical fiction. Okay, there's no such thing as the state of nature. Well, as I personally said before, although we don't know about the social the state of nature, studying history, it seems that plausibly there was a point in time when human beings had no total zero organization. They didn't live in tribes. They had nothing. It was just the jungle and naked human beings or beings that resemble human beings, hominins, or monkey-like creatures, whatnot, roaming the jungles. In any case, we don't know about this. And we don't know that this contract really occurred, that human beings really came together as a sort of agreement. Neither explicit nor implicit. Not to mention the fact that when you think about it, when did this contract happen? I never heard of it. No one ever asked me. Second point, does just growing up in a state imply that you have consented to the laws of the state and its moral principles? Remember what Socrates' argument is. You grow up, you're born and you grow up in a state, okay, and by doing that, if you don't complain, you do nothing about it, it means that you agree. Is it true? I don't know. Now, for example, immigrants and political refugees, they actually do explicitly consent. They have to, when they are naturalized, they swear that they abide by the laws of that country or that state. But what about people who are born, people who are natives of a country? They're never really asked, do you agree or disagree? So it's a very complicated question. Now, again, as I said, I'm not saying that these are telling, destroying, damaging criticisms. They have been addressed, but I'm not going to talk about it now. Another important criticism is, how do we handle those who don't or cannot participate in a social contract? Because remember that the social contract, I didn't mention this. The social contract is basically an agreement, a pact that certain individuals agree upon. But what kind of individuals? Well, obviously, it implies that the individuals in question are rational individuals, because non-human animals, for example, the mentally impaired, humans, small children, and other individuals are not able to agree or disagree. They don't even have a concept of a contract. They don't have a concept, some of them don't even have a concept of self. And so what do we do about them? If they are not part of the contract, what are they? How do we behave? What do we do to them? So there's a lot to be said about, especially nowadays, about nature. Think about it. Nature is not nature itself. The trees, the waters, the mountains, they're not rational beings. So they're not part of the contract. And so someone has to decide for them. Non-human animals. Well, non-human animals are living creatures that feel pain or pleasure. They have wants, they have desires. But guess what? According to many social contract theorists, animals are objects. We have the total control over them, and we can decide whatever we want to do with them. We can eat meat, butcher them, slaughter them, raise them for food, exploit them in any kind of way. But what about children or the mentally impaired? They can't think like us. Some human beings will never be able to understand the contract, understand morality, being rational. What do we do with them? Do we exploit them too? Are we permitted to exploit them too? Because just like animals, non-human animals, some human beings, many human beings, will never be able to fully understand or understand at all the contract. Complicated story. There's also, this leads to a theoretical paradox. Now think about this. On the one hand, it is a moral act to decide who has seats at the contract table. But on the other hand, according to contractualism, morality comes into being only by contract. So you see where the problem is. So in other words, morality is required from the start. But there's no such thing as morality at the start. So someone has to make a move, a bold move, and say, this is the start. But that very start is a moral start. This is also very complicated. Well, there are many, many other criticisms and observations and arguments. The last one would be that a contract is an artificial artificial and cold pact that has no room for sentiments. Okay? So, for example, positive moral emotions, compassion, and love, hope, okay, empathy. These feelings cannot be sanctioned or invented by the contract. What does that even mean? That you have by contract the obligation to be compassionate. You don't. And this omission many feel that is a very serious defect of contractarian ethics. Well, this is the end for now. Here I explained briefly some of the main ideas, many concepts of a social contract. I hope you enjoy this presentation and that will be useful to you. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.